Ma'am.
Katrina, you're muted.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Katrina Wade-Golden and I serve as the Deputy Chief Diversity Officer here at the university. Thank you for joining us for this crucial conversation for social change. Today's conversation is being live streamed on YouTube and will be recorded for those who are unable to join us live. Participants can use the Q&A feature throughout the discussion to submit questions for panelists, and we will try to leave a few minutes at the end to answer some of those questions. In order to increase the accessibility of this session, we have live closed captioning services providing accurate transcriptions, and we will also have American Sign Language interpretation services provided throughout the entire conversation. As you can see reflected on your screens, we have a very distinguished panel today who bring a variety of perspectives to our conversation. Thank you to each of you and to all of those watching online for joining us. I want to start by centering us in a space of reflection. Specifically, I would like to start by addressing why we're here today. 1 year ago, following the murder of George Floyd and other Black Americans, and amid a national outcry for action and change, U of M hosted a live dialogue with some of us who are present in this call today. The panel discussion was designed to facilitate an authentic and transparent conversation among our own campus community related to race, racism, police brutality, and campus climate amid increased societal tensions and calls for action. Last year, we heard loud and clear calls from our community and our student panelists in particular, asking, what are we as an institution going to do? And also a call for transparency and what one panelist called tangibles. Now, I want to just spend a couple seconds speaking to that idea of what are we going to do? And I really want to stretch us to be thinking about the collective we. Because if we are to change the culture in the institution, it is going to be the responsibility is going to be upon all of us. All of us have to collectively act and contribute to the solutions. So today is an opportunity to share some of those updates and tangibles with the understanding that we are at the beginning of this important work and we have a long way to go. It's also a critically important opportunity to continue our discussion about race, law enforcement, protests, and reform, and to highlight our institutional efforts and to really seize the opportunity to advance today's discussion by adding Vice President Rebecca Cunningham to share our U of M firearm injury prevention research efforts in recognition of National Gun Violence Awareness Day. Our conversation today builds on our collective recommitment as individuals and as a university to ending systemic racism in our society and within our own institution. To get us started, I'd like to first turn our attention to our student panelists and welcome Shay Sabo, and Elise Tooling. Your voices as students are extremely important to this conversation, and we'd like to start off with your sharing your experiences and what you're hearing from your peers on campus. So if you would, Shay, please share with us how the past year has impacted you and what action you have seen or taken as a result.
Hi, I'm so happy to have the opportunity to speak today on this panel with such amazing, honorable people, so thank you for having me. Last year, we saw George Floyd's death revive renewed protest and support for Black lives. And last year specifically, the world's passion for social justice inspired me to speak out about the hatred of my own people, the Jewish people. And as a Jewish Israeli woman, I have always been focused on my activism on two things: Israeli and Palestinian unity, and the other being anti-Semitism, which is a coined term for Jewish hatred. And I know the strongest actions I can take personally is being a conscious consumer of content and spreading accurate information, whether that be through my social media platform or even through writing for the Michigan Daily. And I've had many obstacles, including my work regarding unity being taken down from the Michigan Daily because of negative responses. Some of my work about being a Jew was never even published. I've been silenced with people saying that it's gaslighting to post about anti-Semitism when there's, Palestinian suffering. And in reality, anti-Semitism is a part of the social justice fight. It needs to be addressed because you cannot fight for one people's humanity at the cost of the other. You can address Palestinian suffering and also condemn Jewish and Israeli hatred. And anti-Semitism is unfortunately a Jewish reality, a Jewish person's reality, and we are being attacked, boycotted, and dismissed as a minority. Just recently, there was a 400% increase in Jewish hate crimes, 400% in a matter of days. Anyone who spends the time invalidating anti-Semitic attacks simply just do not care about Jewish people. So circling back last year, the passion of fighting for Black lives, for Asian lives, for the rights of minorities really compelled me to fight for my people's humanity as well. And again, I'm also very appreciative of conversations like these because we can collectively exchange ideas and thoughts that will contribute to ending discrimination, starting at our own institution. So I've been a victim of misconceptions, especially with the conflict. So our conversations today are very desperately needed.
Thank you so much for those comments, Shay. Elise, would you like to share your perspective?
Thanks. So first, I'd like to thank the panel for inviting me and note that my voice is one of many and that I cannot and do not represent the entirety of the vastly diverse graduate population at the University of Michigan. And I think I can start with reflecting on the past year. The need for social and structural change on campus was greatly compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic for graduate students. I'm appreciative of the Graduate Employees Organization Union for the immense amount of effort and tireless advocacy that they have brought to campus. We continue to see organizing across campus from multiple student and staff groups, which helps to bring voices to higher levels of the university administration. Organizing ultimately strengthens safety to a wider set of individuals, and it is critical within institutions such as UM that have great amounts of power. But I'd like to speak a little bit more broadly on the culture at UM and issues that were further exacerbated in the prior year. From my position as a student, instructor, and student organization leader in the School of Public Health, I have seen efforts by staff, faculty, and administration to find ways to change, to create space for conversation and to listen. But there is still a long way to go from translating listening into hearing and hearing into short and long-term change. Part of this is to make structural investment in person time. For example, the lack of compensation for service work is a widespread issue in academia and disproportionately affects minority students, staff, and faculty. Change making is an extensive, iterative, and high energy process. By reallocating a percentage of graduate student, staff, and faculty time to change making would enable more equitable participation and provide structural support for sustainable change. This is different than asking students, staff, and faculty to do even more than the research, teaching, mentoring, and practice that they already juggle. For graduate students at the Ann Arbor campus, there are a myriad of changes that would further ensure equity. One example is expanding the provision of funding for caregiving to include elderly caregiving in addition to child caregiving. Another example is to remove the additional fees charged to international students to attend UM. A third example is to ensure affirmation of place, space, belonging of all identities. This includes race, gender, sexuality, religion, and citizenship, among others. could better affirm identity, place, space, and belonging by evaluating student experience of institutional betrayal, which can include experiences of gaslighting by the university and its messaging, to perceptions of physical safety on and across campus space. So I'd just like to wrap up and acknowledge and give appreciation to President Schlissel, Vice President of Research Cunningham, Executive Director Washington, Professor Lewis, Deputy Chief Wade-Golden, and Ms. Sabo. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Thank you so very much, Shay and Elise, for those really insightful and heartfelt comments. They really certainly center on what many individuals are feeling, and they're grounded in these calls for continued actions around these issues. So now I'd like to get the faculty perspective in here as well. As faculty serve a pivotal role on our campus in creating welcoming and inclusive environments, as well as guiding our research enterprise and translating those key learnings to policies, practices, and other applications. With that, Professor Lewis, can you share with us your reflections on how the past year has impacted you and what action you have seen or taken as a result?
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And so I've been thinking about this and realizing that while I sit here as a faculty member, I'm also a 65-year-old Black man who was born in Virginia and raised in the United States. And that's only one part of myself. I'm an academic for sure. I'm a leader. I'm a historian. I'm a past chair of a board of a small liberal arts college in Minnesota. I'm actually also a father, a husband, et cetera. And so in a way, the scholarship talks about intersectionality, although I prefer the actual concept of multipositionality, that we find ourselves in different points and times foregrounding and moving to the background, different aspects of ourselves. And that in some ways actually explains how we relate to the events of the last year and over the last several decades. And so let me highlight this real quickly in 4 different ways. One is a leader. So at the time of George Floyd's death, I was the chair of the board of Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, which is only 4 hours away from the Twin Cities, where we had students, alums, and other stakeholders who were actually in the Twin Cities at that time. It was coming upon us to actually do more than to pause and reflect. We had to actually integrate our actions with that of those who were on the streets and all. And so as board chair, then I played a role as an academic to actually be able to pinpoint that what we saw last year was actually George Floyd joining the pantheon of martyrs who have been back to 1619. And in a way that it is the legacy and the link between 1619 and the present. And that actually accounted for why that moment and why for more than 9 minutes, we watched in the nation and the world in horror as he died. So that was one part. I mean, so that's the role as a leader. But there's also the role of professor. So last year I taught an undergraduate course in the fall on key issues in African-American history to 25 plus undergraduates. And that was an opportunity for them to be able to contextualize then the whole set of dynamics over the past several months, where they came to understand that this was not just a new event, and that indeed there are questions there about repair and remembrance that are key. And that was followed, that undergraduate course, by a graduate course then on reparations that I taught in the School of Public Policy on sort of reparations policy and history as a way to begin to actually think through. And so there's a pedagogical aspect to all of this as a faculty members that we play, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level. As a researcher, I had another role to play. And as I think through all of this, the center I direct, the Center for Social Solutions, received a $5 million grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to begin a national conversation about racial repair. And so we're working in 8 communities across the United States over the next 3 years to develop community-based reparations programs in cities and towns, large and small, north and south. And so this becomes the researchers part of the faculty, where you actually take this moment and then trying to figure out how do you come up with tangible, implementable solutions. And then finally, it's then the university citizens role. And as a faculty member, as a university citizen, then responded to the call to co-chair the task force on advancing public safety and security. And our task force actually worked over the course of 4 months and from January to April of 2021 to come up with a set of commendations and recommendations, which will be released to the broader university community in the next few weeks. But we ended up with 15 things to note that we thought the university was doing well in the areas of public safety and security, and came up with another 29 recommendations for reforming or advancing new aspects of work. And I think in that respect, and then as leader, as professor, as a researcher, as university citizen, begins to way to sort of wrap together what it means to be a faculty member and thinking about the events of the last year and how they connect to past events.
Thank you so much, Professor Lewis, for sharing that broad swath of work that you're engaged with as it relates to racial and social justice efforts. And what I'm taking away from even just this first 15 minutes or so from this conversation is the wide array of work that there is to be accomplished around all these aspects of inequity. And so it's certainly, sobering to know and to hear the things that we as a community have to work on. But it's great that we're in this space at this time, having this conversation and pivoting to a space of discussing solutions and collaborations to address the many things that are being lifted up. So thank you for your contribution so far. So now let me shift gears a bit for a minute to talk about some additional institutional change initiatives and bring in President Schlissel and Executive Director Washington into the conversation. And you both have a unique vantage point. Why do I want to call you Professor Schlissel? President Schlissel has the purview as the leader of the institution and Executive Director Washington as the head of our Law Enforcement and Public Safety Division. And we would love to hear your perspective. So I'll start with President Schlissel. Can you tell us more about the changes or new efforts that have been made here on campus to address many of the concerns of our community that have come to light over the past year?
Thanks, Katrina, and thanks for moderating the panel today, and to all of the audience members for listening in and joining the conversation either directly or indirectly. And thanks to Shay and Elise for stepping forward. I know it's always challenging, but you express yourself so incredibly well and eloquently that it adds tremendously to the conversation. And it's absolutely fantastic having Earl as a colleague. We underrepresented Earl's career accomplishments. He's really been an academic leader, a social leader, and now a campus leader once again. So it's really a pleasure to be joined by these colleagues on the panel. Before talking about the new things that have gone on this year in response to our conversation last year and the ongoing challenges around race, I want to shout out our DEI efforts. And Katrina, you've been central to those. And we're really ending the 5th year of our first 5-year strategic plan. Literally thousands of people have been engaged in DEI work. A significant fraction of it has been to combat racism, and I think a growing fraction of it, certainly this year with the society's focus, has been directed in that way. But before talking about new things, I just wanted to pay my respect to the folks that have done this heavy lifting. We've got DEI leads in approaching 100 different units around campus that week after week and month after month have this as a focus of their contribution to the university, and that's ongoing. But in terms of the new things we've been working on this year, and I give the Provost Collins, credit for many of these things, we've begun an anti-racism tenure track faculty hiring program. So we've committed over the course of this year and the next 2 years, so a total of 3 years, to hire 20 new faculty with expertise in racial inequality and structural racism. This is what we do. This is how we change the world as scholars. Everything from healthcare disparities to issues of justice in society more broadly. The first of these hires were underway. We gave them exceptions from our hiring freeze this year, so they got up and running. And over the course of a couple of years, we'll have a cohort of 20 additional colleagues doing scholarship and teaching in this area. We've also submitted a grant to the NIH for a major new funding program to support diverse faculty hiring and career mentoring. And Rob Sellers, who many of you know, our Chief Diversity Officer, is the principal investigator on that proposal. And we're all very optimistic this will enhance our work as well. We're fortunate to be the home of the National Center for Institutional Diversity, and they've launched an anti-racism collaborative to provide a platform to bring scholars and students from across the campus together to work on projects and to convene and to elevate the work of our research community that's associated with race and racial justice. Our students, many students are participating in a program called Envisioning an Anti-Racist World. It's a design challenge run out of the Center for Academic Innovations, but involving the Arts Initiative and your office, Katrina, the ODEI office. And it asks, how do you imagine a vision for an anti-racist world in terms of a campus, a community, a neighborhood, a city, a state, a nation that truly embodies the ideals of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for the future? We've got discussions going in all 19 of our schools about extending the race and ethnicity requirement, modifying it, deepening it, making sure it does have a focus on racism as well as other critical topics of understanding diversity, inclusion, and equity, and how to infuse DEI principles and anti-racism more broadly into our curriculum. You know, there are aspects of racism that touch upon really every subject we teach, from the social sciences and humanities all the way through the hardest core sciences. And we have to find good ways to talk about that and have our faculty learn enough to be teachers in this area themselves. We're doing professional development for the DEI unit leads, of course, all the time, and anti-racism has been a highlighted topic this year. We'll talk more, I'm sure, about the Advancing Public Safety at University of Michigan task force that Earl mentioned. Earl Lewis was kind enough to co-chair along with Daphne Watkins. We're going to push their report out in the next week or so. We've been working on responses, things we can do immediately in direct response to the suggestions coming out of the report, and some things will need further study, but that's been a pretty intense effort. And of course, we established this year a scholarship in honor of George Floyd and solicited donations widely and continue to do so to really remember what happened through the generations and use it to help students achieve their educational goals to make the world a better and more equitable place. All of this relies on the creativity and the energy of the faculty and the staff and the students. The frustrating thing is it always feels as if things are going way too slowly, and all around us, we continue to be bombarded with the evidence of injustice and hate. So that really ups the ante and makes everybody want to push harder. And the one thing I'd urge us all to continue to do is sort of be patient with one another. Everybody, for this effort to be successful around anti-racism of all different types, folks need to be able to open their mind, listen, and understand, not begin with too many preconceived notions, be willing to recognize when we're wrong and recognize when we have more to learn, and not be threatened by one another's discourse. The only way to make progress is to be able to talk to each other about these difficult topics.
Thank you so much, President Schlissel. And also thank you for your call out of the DEI plan. And I just want to take a minute to thank those 100 plus DEI leads all across campus who are working to move the effort in all of the schools, colleges, and units. Serving as the director of implementation has been the most rewarding aspect of my career. And so I'm really happy to be a part of that at the institution. So thank you for that. Now, can I welcome Executive Director Washington to share with us a bit about your reflections and your perspectives and a bit of your work as well in advancing these issues.
Oop, you're muted, Eddie. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Katrina, and thanks to all of those who helped to make this possible. I'm always excited to talk about the things that we're doing in public safety to help advance and to address anti-racism and to call out our contributions and our failures in that space. But before I get to talk about what we believe we've done that's tangible as what's been described and where we've contributed, I think, to a lot of these efforts, I want to talk about some of the things that, I talk about it in three ways. One is the things that we've done to listen. I think engagement, I want to talk a little bit about what we've heard over the last year as we've elevated our engagement across the university, talking to various, a whole host of identity groups. I want to talk about what we've shared along the way in response to some of the things we heard. And then I want to get to some of the things that we've done as a result of that activity. So the first thing I want to talk about is like, who have we heard from? Obviously, I've met and worked with, first and foremost, our Police Oversight Committee. And I'm proud of the work that we've done in working with them to move them in more of a proactive posture in terms of oversight and transparency and accountability for us. And we have, and again, the outcomes of that I'll talk about later. We're appreciative of Professor Lewis's efforts with the Advancing Public Safety Task Force initiative. I think about the work that and contributions we've made in providing documents, and requests to again try to be more responsive, more accountable in our policies and procedures and our organizational structure and our funding and that sort of thing. We met with leadership in Central Student Government as well as Rackham Student Government. We met with the University of Michigan NAACP representatives. We met with Scope Board leadership. Special thanks to Rod and Katrina for all of the meet and greets and engagement that I've been able to enjoy with the DE&I leads, with the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion's Advisory Board, and not to overlook the fact that DPSS is also very present in Michigan Medicine's faculty, staff, and visitors. So we've been involved in their anti-racism oversight committee with our leadership over there. All the while, we also are engaged in our everyday engagement with when we have unfortunate victims of crimes, whether it be victims of our interpersonal violence, physical assaults, or where property is lost or property is damaged. Even in those engagements over the last year, we've listened and learned about some of the ways that we approach prior to the engagement and how we look at approaching and the service we provide going forward. Needless to say, some of the things we've heard in those engagements, some reoccurring themes, is where we failed, where law enforcement in many instances have failed communities, especially communities of colors or marginalized communities, and the overall fear. We're in one community, we're very much viewed as a resource for preventing harm. In other communities, we're the source of harm. So which leads again to the lack of trust and lack of confidence in what we do here at the University of Michigan, whether it's happening here or happening nationally or internationally. We've obviously heard the need for greater transparency and accountability. We've heard folks have questions about our recruitment of our officers, how our selection processes, our training, the psychological and mental fitness of our officers in DPSS. Specifically, people want to know what kind of training and how do we train around implicit bias, around mental health, and how do we deploy our resources in that space. We had additional interest around the demographic and diversity of our workforce. How educated are our officers? What's the racial and gender and identity makeup of them? Others want to know how we handle complaints in the accountability space. How easy is it for someone to actually make a complaint against an officer, and there to be a process that is transparent and outcomes can be shared, whether it be disciplinary or otherwise. Inquiries around our budget. Are we similar to the idea around how militaristic are we? How many weapons we have and types of weapons, and where are we prioritizing our funding? Is it around things that don't serve, where we don't prioritize what we do according to our community's priorities versus our own police or public safety priorities. We've had concerns in again, areas where we've talked about police and the ratio of armed officers or sworn to non-sworn, and our relationships with mutual aid and other law enforcement. And that's kind of just a highlight of what we've heard along the way. I would say that our response, or what we shared along the way, is in many cases we couldn't agree more. First and foremost, again, we've as a profession in many instances, but I have to stress there's also I know because I know me and I know those who I serve with that aren't failing the communities to the degree today or historically the way that some have. But we have to, what we shared is that we accept responsibility, and that it's essential that we do that we acknowledge where the practices and the approaches and strategies that we use that aren't serving the entire community and is in the entire community's best interest. So what I would say, what we've done about it in terms of not just what we shared, but I think what some of the outcomes have been tangibly is that we have worked with the Police Oversight Committee, and we have made tangible recommendations with the chair and of the committee. And we look forward to that. The work that we've done with Professor Lewis and the rest of the Advancing Task Force around data collection and the ability to have not only demographic and other data readily available and collected and delivered, but also having it delivered in real time so that there's not a delay. Also, not just data that we collect at the university, but data that's collected and can be used to inform and to highlight, instances where there may be implicit bias, or where there's, and also in our crime fighting efforts. So I think those are two tangible, you'll see tangible change. I think that now I know that we have actually already made certain policies. We've gone through a review process of all of our policies, especially around enforcement, use of force. We made those policies more public. We've posted them on our website, and we've adapted even in real time to the demands early on with our COVID efforts, where officers that normally we would deploy a certain type of resource, where we've partnered with other university folks to ensure that our efforts to prevent harm, to reduce harm, that we're not creating anxiety at the same time with certain groups. So I think, in short, what you should hear me saying is that we've listened, and we listened to a variety of folks. We continue to do that. We've assessed and we've made adjustments, and we'll continue to do that. And we look forward to those areas where, as the president talked about, what you should hear me saying too is that I don't know that there's been a time when we've said no. There has been a time when there's been a request for access to me, or accessibility, availability. And so I look forward to those opportunities where we can, at least at the University of Michigan, lead the way in that space where it's hard. I know it's hard to engage an entity that you don't trust. But at the same time, I have to stress, much like what Katrina said, is that what we have to do, I can't, or our organization can't do alone. So an essential aspect I always believed in my 40 years to people being safe or preventing harm, and understanding that safe means different things to different groups, is that there has to be a relationship. But also the challenge to establishing trust is in building relationships. So we recognize that challenge, but I also am thankful for those groups that I have met with, and I have learned a great deal from, and also have had an opportunity to share, and look forward to the dialogue today and going forward, and again, allowing our organization to not just lead in this space, but lead across the country. Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you so much, Eddie, for those comments and for your partnership in working together to, again, build this collaborative and collective bridge to get us to where we need to be with regard to these issues. And speaking of partnership, I also just want to take a moment to shout out the 200 plus DEI leads within Michigan Medicine. That is a critical partner in this work. That entity is a critical partner in this work as well. So just want to create the space and the opportunity to do that. So now I'd like to pivot a bit and also bring in Dr. Rebecca Cunningham in addressing the role of education, research, and community. So Dr. Cunningham, further examining these difficult issues through the lens of education and community, what role can research play in this conversation that we're having today?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this wonderful panel today. It's an honor to be with this group, and I want to specifically, thank the students who took their time to offer their voice today. I come and speak to you today both with a background grounded in a career in public health research and also as an emergency physician, in addition to research leadership here. And as researchers and scholars, we really have a unique opportunity to use our passion and expertise to address some of society's biggest challenges, many of which we're talking about today, and I applaud the group for having these difficult conversations. When you look at serious public health problems, everything from COVID to car crashes in the past, our nation almost always turns to science to find the solutions, and the roots of those sciences is in research. And I come to you today to talk a little bit about the Firearm Injury Prevention Institute that we're launching, and firearm injury and death is really no different in how we're going to find solutions to that. It's in science. It must be no different. And today in the United States alone, over 40,000 people die every year, from firearm related injuries. It's 100 people a day on average in the US. We know we can do a lot more to address this problem, which is why I'm so excited today to announce that the University of Michigan, with the strongest support from President Schlissel and Provost Collins, has launched a new U of M Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention. Firearms can be an incredibly polarizing topic. And I know at the end of the day, despite people having very differing perspectives on these and what the solution should be, we all can agree that we have to do something about this and we have to reduce the number of injuries and death. And to get there, research and science is going to be critical. It can be difficult and uncomfortable to have conversations about firearm injury like the conversations we're having today, but we simply can't be silent on this any longer as researchers. It's part of our mission to research and to contribute to solutions for the most pressing issues for our state and for our country. And that's why we're launching this new institute on this day of National Gun Violence Awareness. On this day, I wear orange for that. The Institute will generate new knowledge and advance innovative solutions that will ultimately reduce firearm injury, I'm confident. In this way, I'm so proud that the U of M is a leader in this research space. It's encouraging others around the country that despite the past polarization, will be able to focus critically on this topic. Our focus is on injury prevention here and on preventing firearm injuries and deaths. Well, like the automobile research of the 1960s, today, the field of firearm injury prevention is in its infancy. And at the U of M, we're really uniquely positioned to bring together researchers and our external partners so that we can formulate and answer critical questions around safety and prevention of injury and death. We know firearms have been a leading cause of death for Black youth and young men for an entire generation. Among all ages, Black men were nearly 14 times more likely to die in a firearm homicide than white men, and 8 times more likely to die in a firearm homicide than the general population. This isn't acceptable. We need to provide objective data and to find solutions to this, both for this population as well as for the rest of the population in the US. Our teams here at U of M are exploring firearm injuries across the lifespan. That includes firearm injury by suicide, community violence, domestic violence, peer violence, and excessive police force with lethal means. As the nation grapples with excessive and unwarranted use of force by police, academic research, scholarship, and creative practice is necessary and part of the solution to understand the data and the complexity of these issues. Our teams are focusing their efforts on exploring disparities in susceptibility to firearm injuries by race, gender, geographic location, and socioeconomic status. There is so much we do not know that we need to sort out together as researchers. We know that firearm injury is the second leading cause of death among children of all ages across rural populations and urban America. Our institute will play a leading role in educating with curriculum and training a diverse next generation of faculty and students who will advance the field of firearm injury prevention. The Institute has great promise for addressing the inequality and justice related to firearm injury prevention, including the racial disparities and inequalities that we've talked to, by bringing together and leveraging diverse expertise across our research community as well as our local communities with local voice. Similarly, we have broad and deep research expertise on our campus for addressing a variety of topics and related to racism, racial inequality, and race or justice, some of which President Schlissel spoke of, which our Office of the Vice President for Research has also sought to catalyze and support in this past year. I'm so proud. For instance, we had an overwhelming response to our recently launched anti-racism grants program. Research proposals from across the university demonstrated our faculty's expertise and capacity across a wide variety of pressing issues, ranging from technology and police surveillance among Black communities, redlining impacts on noise and environmental disparities, enhancing anti-racism and cultural competence in healthcare systems, anti-Asian xenophobia and activism emerging during the COVID pandemic, social and structural determinants of birth challenges among Black mothers, and many more. Through these new grants programs and other efforts, we will seek to support rigorous and intellectually ambitious research and scholarship that's relevant to the most pressing questions and compelling opportunities in relation to racial equality and justice in our society. We know that research is going to be so important in finding solutions here, both to the never-ending toll we seem to have in firearm violence, as well as to the topics that we talk about today. So thank you so much, Katrina, for the opportunity to share some of how our researchers, our faculty, staff, and students who are doing this work across campus are going to be part of the solution both today and helping us find that in the path forward.
Thank you, Rebecca. And as I look across, all the comments and the broad swath of work being done, and tying it back to my earlier comments about tangible things, the insight that we received from one of our panelists last year, it is remarkable what we've been able to accomplish as an institution over the year. These efforts are certainly foundational efforts to build upon as we work to create that diverse, equitable, and inclusive and anti-racist environment that we all aspire to. But at the same time, while so much has been done, there is still so much more that needs to be done. So I'm so appreciative for the partnership for all the people around this virtual table. So now let's turn our attention to some specific questions that we're receiving from our participants. And I'd like to get through as many as we can. So for the first one, I like to start with engaging the students on the panel again, and then others can feel free to jump in. So the question is this: as a university and as our primary goal, how can we best continue to support our students as we continue to navigate these difficult times? And in terms of the difficult times are really cast in the space of what I call twin pandemics, if you will. So the pandemic of COVID-19, but also the pandemic of racial inequality. So what would you offer, and either Shay or Elise, you can jump in here, what would you offer by way of what we can do as an institution to better support students in this space?
Shay, do you want me to go first, or would you like to go first?
You can go first.
Okay, well, I think there are a lot of different things we could do. Kind of tying back to what I said earlier about ensuring belonging and identity and affirmation, we can think about the structural barriers within the UM system. And so one program that's really important is the Go Blue Guarantee, which, for those watching, if you're not familiar with it, it guarantees or it provides opportunities for students to come to UM Ann Arbor for education from if families make under a certain amount. That guarantee is not extended, though, to the Dearborn or to the Flint campuses at this time. And yet those are both campuses that represent areas where we know we have larger proportions of low-income families, as well as communities of color. So that's one thing structurally that could change. I mean, the way we are fighting COVID, and I think things have gone a lot better in the winter semester, and the spring and summer semesters look like they're going to be well run, but the fall semester was a disaster. And there was a lot of betrayal by the administration of students, and that was really harmful. And while I think that there have been efforts to make amends, there has to be acknowledgement that those betrayals aren't easily overcome. And so, we have a lot of work to do. The final thing I'll say is that, and this doesn't directly, it intersects with COVID and racism, but it's more just of a general problem on campus, is that there is a misnomer that sexual harassment and assault is not a culture, is not part of the culture, and it absolutely is. We have had multiple examples of very high up faculty and administrators who have been perpetrators. And so when the university says this isn't part of our culture, it actually disenfranchises people who have experienced those kind of exposures. And so instead, the university needs to acknowledge where it's been at. And I think that there's work that has been done to do that, but I think we have a lot further to go. And that extends also to racism, to police brutality, to sexual orientation, to citizenship, and identifying the places where students are disenfranchised systematically. And I'll hand it over to Shay.
Elise really hit great points with everything she mentioned, including the Go Blue guarantee. We need to instill more programs like this and extend it, as Elise mentioned. I truly believe the first step towards adequately supporting students and supporting an inclusive movement is to understand that the system itself is fundamentally unfair. Society has reinforced this divide again and again in all social institutions, even in the classrooms. So it's crucial to amplify the voices who have been silenced, amplify them on campus and listen, build connections, and have conversations, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Communication is key to break down any discriminatory culture or misconceptions. Also in the classrooms, professors can try reflecting or having peer discussions to reflect on how their teaching practices are influenced by race and culture. Honestly, any effort for inclusion makes a difference for racial and socioeconomic disparities. So yeah, amplifying student voices, building connections, and reflecting is my take on what the university can do to support the student body. They're just the first few steps.
Are there any other panelists who would like to jump in here?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Those are all obvious and important things, and things that we talk about a lot, that there's a lot of student advocacy around. They all have validity to them. So, they're all important things to have on the table. There's so many of them we could pick out, but let me pick out one Elise mentioned around the Go Blue guarantee, and Shay mentioned it as well. So the Go Blue guarantee was started here in Ann Arbor a few years ago to deal with a problem that's here that I'm sure you're very sensitive to, is we don't really represent the breadth of the economy of the state amongst our student body. We're very heavily skewed amongst the undergraduates towards young people from wealthy families. And the Go Blue guarantee was designed to make our efforts to recruit students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds more effective. When it started, we had about 14% Pell eligible students, and now we're up over 20% Pell eligible students from the state of Michigan on this particular campus. We had around 15% or so of our students were from the bottom half of the economy, 15%, and now we're heading up into the mid-20s. So it was designed to deal with an Ann Arbor specific problem. Each campus, although we're under the umbrella of the University of Michigan, is actually different from one another. It serves a different community. For example, Ann Arbor is an enormous research intensive university with students and faculty from every state and 100 countries around the world. And Flint Dearborn are focused on serving students from all different backgrounds, but largely within commuting distance of the campus. There's very little research activity relative to Ann Arbor in Flint and Dearborn. It's much more focused on education, which is exactly where it should be. The chancellors determine where the financial sweet spots are for investment. For Flint and Dearborn, a big challenge is getting more of our students to graduate. So the graduation rates on both of those campuses are low. There are many complicated reasons why. But when given resources, the chancellors would rather invest them in helping the students that matriculate to school make it all the way through the end and get a degree. An alternative, we can take that same money and invest it on a Go Blue Guarantee-like program in Flint and Dearborn. But if we can't solve the problem of helping students make it all the way through to graduation, maybe that isn't the most effective way to spend the money. And up to now, and there's no rule that says this, but up to now, the 3 campuses have had separate leadership, separate budgets, separate accreditation, separate admission standards, separate tuition, and the resources that get generated on each campus get spent on each campus. So what we would be talking about, and there is discussion at the regent level and amongst the executives, is that the right way to run the University of Michigan? And is it an appropriate thing to take revenues from one campus and spend it on another campus? When the state gives us money for education, the budget goes separately to each of the 3 campuses. So it's not like U of M here gets one big central budget and it's up to us how to distribute it. We get a budget to each campus directly from the state. The students on each campus pay tuition directly to that campus. Each campus does philanthropy. Each campus has other sources of revenue, and then the money gets spent on that campus. And that's the way it's been done for since Flint and Dearborn joined the University of Michigan. So I'm 100% on board with the goal of figuring out ways to promote access, affordability, high quality education, and completion of education on all 3 of our campuses. And we've got to keep talking about the best ways to make the best investments to do that.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, of course, Elise.
Thank you. So that was a great overview, and I appreciate you explaining it like that. My understanding was that the Go Blue Guarantee was actually a reallocation of other funds. And my question to you is, why is it they're not just an expansion of funds? turned a profit last year during COVID, which was surprising. And it has a, 60 billion or 40 billion endowment? So why aren't we spending more money to try to be more inclusive, knowing that equity is not just ensuring the same step ladder, but actually trying to elevate from a historically inequitable system? Yeah.
So the questions are fair and worthwhile questions. I just want to correct some of the facts. We're a nonprofit. We don't turn a profit. So at the end of the day, we don't have shareholders. We don't have people we distribute money to. The university last year on the academic side in Ann Arbor ran about $110 million deficit. And we're in the process of trying to cover that deficit with the federal money that's being pushed out through the various HERF and CARES Acts, and we're trying to make up for that. When you look at the bottom line on this consolidated budget statement, and you see the net worth of the university going up through time, that's a sum of many, many different things, but it isn't the pluses and minuses of the university budget. So the endowment is $12 billion and not $40 billion. And most of it is tied up with gift agreements where we get the money from a donor. On the agreement, we'll spend it on a particular purpose. So it's not like a big bank account. If it was a big bank account, I think we'd have a great argument about what to do with $12 billion and how to do the most good in the world. That isn't what the endowment is. The thing you say that's definitely fair is the conversation that you're asking for should be a statewide conversation. We're 44th in the whole country in the states supporting higher ed per student number, 44th in the United States. So we're failing, we're failing. And the idea of pushing up to the state level is everybody benefits when anybody gets educated, everybody benefits. So we should all share in the cost. So the question is, should the Ann Arbor campus be the entity that provides equity, taking resources from tuition in Ann Arbor, for example, and using it to support programs or financial aid in Flint? Or should we be lobbying the state to actually provide adequate resources for everybody to get educated? And I'm open to the discussion. It's an important and fair discussion. I don't want to allow, Katrina, this conversation to go down a pathway, and it's a conversation that's obviously going to continue. So thanks for raising it, Elise.
So thank you for those comments. It certainly is a necessary conversation to be had, but I want to move us along to our final question before we get to closing thoughts. And it's been addressed in some ways, but I do want to advance it in the hopes that maybe one or two people can briefly respond to it. And that question is, last year's Crucial Conversations for Change centered heavily on evaluating racism and brutality against the Black community. But it has become increasingly clear in the last year that violence is prevalent against many races, religions, and orientations. What can the university do to better address these issues more broadly? So one or two people, would you like to take that?
Katrina, I'd be happy to talk about a few things with firearm violence. I think specifically, I think one of the things you're raising is, when we talk about violence, it's not one thing in many aspects. Just like cancer is not one type of cancer. There's many types of cancer. Violence has many types of aspects as well, and from homicide to suicide to domestic violence to, when we talk about firearms, to mass shootings that we're seeing almost every week now, these tragedies. There's these many different aspects, and all of them have facets, different risk factors, different protective factors, going to have different solutions to them. And so I think that's really important to think about when we think about the complexity of this is, unfortunately, there's not going to be one simple solution to any of these, but we're going to have to dig in deep into all the conversations on each of them. And really work towards all of the nitty-gritty work that has to be done to move us ahead. I mean, I would say, we have researchers, for example, on campus right now addressing some of these myriad of issues from on the mass shooting and school shooting issues. We have Professor Heinze in the School of Public Health is doing some great work on the anonymous reporting within schools on how we're going to on how people can be raised up who might have a problem before they go on to commit one of these tragic school shootings, as well as to understanding some of the shooting drills that are happening in schools and if those are helpful or harmful to the students that are in the communities in those schools. We just don't really have very much data or work on it now. And there's a lot more to be done. And that's the kind of work that we need to dig into and do. Also, I'll mention when we've talked a lot about race as a disparity. When we talk also about firearm violence, is really across geography as well, and differences in our rural parts of the state is often very much suicide. In the northern part of Michigan and in the UP, we have a tremendous problem with youth firearm suicide. We have groups there working actually with gun shops and gun shop owners to help identify people when they come in to buy a gun who might be using it for self-harm. And there's a lot of work there and intervention programs to be done, as well as to understand what works and what doesn't work. So just some ideas on the vast differences and details of these topics. Thanks for the question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So in our last couple minutes here, I do want to just create the space for some parting words. And I will just say, as we engage in these dialogues, we also have to commit to action. And I'm really encouraged by what we're seeing today, some of the tangibles that have been shared. But we also, in some ways, have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, as we engage these difficult conversations. And I'm really proud of what the university is beginning to do in terms of taking significant steps to acknowledge anti-racism work as an integral component of our DEI work. And simply put, we can't be a racist organization and be diverse, equitable, and inclusive at the same time. We must be an organization where we all can have the opportunity to live, work, lead, serve, and heal in equitable and inclusive ways. And having more intensive focus around anti-racism actions is a very intentional way to help us tremendously in that effort. So if there are like 10 seconds that, a few of you would like to use the space in parting words, we would welcome that.
And let me just say one quick thing. One thing that's been accomplished this year is the narrative has changed. It's gone from diversity and inclusion and, racism is bad to a stance that one has to proactively combat racism. And I think that's a change in discourse that's going to provoke a lot more action than the way we've been approaching this in the past. And I just wanted to recognize it.
Thank you. Other parting thoughts?
Yeah, I would add one more piece here, which is to say that part of the violence that you were alluding to actually has to do with the ways in which we produce and reproduce knowledge. And so we should not delude ourselves to believe that somehow that universities actually won't be at the center of a battle over what actually constitutes things to be taught. And so I highlight and underscore the whole cultural wars that are now emerging over critical race theory that grew out of legal theory, and that is now becoming a new way to say, let's silence certain kinds of knowledge and certain ways of looking at the world. And that's actually linked to this campaign that we've been trying to talk about today.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like we are out of time, but before we end, I just want to thank all of our wonderful panelists today. And again, for taking the time to engage in this very crucial and continuing conversation. A video of the full event will be made available on YouTube. And just a quick announcement, beginning Monday, June 14th, and running through Saturday, June 19th this year, marks the inauguration of the Juneteenth Symposium at the U of M. And although some units across campus have organized Juneteenth events on a local level in the past, to our knowledge, U of M has never celebrated the holiday collectively on a campus-wide scale. So exploring the theme of celebrating Black joy, hope, and healing, the week-long 2021 Juneteenth Symposium is a partnership between U of M and the Ann Arbor branch of the NAACP. And the mission of the Juneteenth Symposium is to celebrate and recognize the liberation of all Black people from slavery made official by the emancipation on June 19, 1865 in Galveston, Texas. So thank you all for your wonderful contributions and your participation today. Forever go blue.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.